is Sarah, and I work at a bookstore called the Book Nook. It's a small, quiet place, and I like it that way. I'm not a very talkative person. I prefer the company of books. They don't ask awkward questions, and they always have interesting stories to tell. The Book Nook is in an older part of town, the kind of place with brick sidewalks and small shops. It's not a busy, modern store. Inside is all wooden shelves, packed tightly with books. Some are new, with shiny covers, but most are old. They have that wonderful old book smell, a mix of paper, dust, and a little bit of magic, I think. Mr. Henderson, the owner, is an older gentleman with kind eyes and a quiet voice. He mostly stays behind the counter, reading or helping customers. I handle the rest, shelving books, organising displays, and sometimes cleaning. That's how I found the box. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and business was slow. Mr. Henderson asked me to tidy up the storage room at the back of the shop. It's a small, cramped space, filled with extra books, old displays, and forgotten things. I didn't mind. It was quiet, and I could be alone with my thoughts. I was moving a stack of old magazines when I saw it, a dusty cardboard box tucked away in a corner. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Curiosity got the better of me. I'm usually not a nosy person, but something about this box felt different. I carefully pulled it out. The cardboard was worn and faded. There was no label, just a handwritten name on the top. Michael. My heart beat a little faster. I know I shouldn't have, but I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, were letters, a whole stack of them. They were tied together with a faded ribbon. Each envelope was addressed to the same name, Michael. The handwriting was delicate and flowing, definitely a woman's. I hesitated. I knew I was invading someone's privacy. These weren't my letters. They weren't meant for me, but they were here, in my bookstore, in a box that looked like it had been forgotten for years. I pulled out the top letter. The paper was thin and yellowed with age. I carefully unfolded it. The date at the top was from over 20 years ago. I started to read. My dearest Michael, it began. The words were so personal, so full of emotion. The writer, a woman named Emily, was writing about her feelings for Michael, about how much she loved him, about a difficult choice she had to make. I read the whole letter, my heart aching for this Emily I didn't even know. It was a story of love and loss, of a relationship that had ended, but clearly hadn't been forgotten. I carefully folded the letter and put it back in its envelope. I looked at the stack of letters, all addressed to Michael, all unread, unsent. A question started to form in my mind. Who was Michael? And why hadn't Emily ever sent these letters? And most important of all, should I do something about it? I knew I had to read the next letter. The next day at work, I couldn't stop thinking about the letters. I tried to focus on my tasks, shelving new arrivals, helping a customer find a book on gardening. But my mind kept drifting back to Emily and Michael. During my lunch break, I went back to the storage room. I knew it was probably wrong, but I felt drawn to those letters. I took the box to a small table in the corner and carefully took out the second letter. It was dated a week after the first. Emily wrote about missing Michael terribly. His laugh, the way he looked at her, the way he always knew how to make her feel better. It was clear their connection was deep. She also wrote about her struggles. It seemed she had moved away, and the distance was making things incredibly difficult. I felt a pang of sympathy for her. I've never been in love like that, but I could understand the pain of separation, the longing for someone who isn't there. After work, I took the letter home with me. Mr. Henderson didn't notice. He was busy with a phone call about a rare book order. I felt a little guilty, like I was stealing something, even though the letters weren't technically mine. That evening I sat on my sofa and read the letter again. Then I read the third and the fourth. Each one revealed a little more of their story. Emily and Michael had met at a local college. They had spent a wonderful year together, but then Emily's family had to move. She had made the difficult decision to go with them, to put her family first. It was clear that she believed it was the right thing to do, but it broke her heart. The more I read, the more I felt torn. A part of me knew I should put the letters back in the box and forget about them. It was none of my business. It was their past, their private story. But another part of me, a stronger part, couldn't let it go. These letters were full of unspoken feelings, of a love that deserved to be acknowledged, even after all these years. What if Michael never knew how much Emily loved him? What if he had spent years wondering what had happened? Should I try to find him? I asked myself aloud. My apartment was small and quiet. The only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. The thought was both exciting and terrifying. It felt like stepping into a story, becoming a character in someone else's life. What if he doesn't want to know? I thought. What if he's moved on? What if he's married with children? What if I open up old wounds that have already healed? But then another thought came. What if it helps him? What if it gives him closure? What if he's been waiting for an answer, a sign, all these years? I knew I was getting carried away. I was romanticising the situation, imagining myself as some kind of messenger of love. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to do something. I decided to do a little research. I didn't have much to go on, just a first name and a city from over 20 years ago. I started with a simple online search. Michael, city name. Of course there were hundreds of results. I tried adding details from the letters. The college they had attended, the park they used to visit. Still, nothing concrete. I felt a little discouraged, but I wasn't ready to give up. I thought, the best place to start looking is right here. I looked at Mr. Henderson. I knew he'd been running this shop for a very long time. Mr. Henderson, I asked hesitantly one afternoon when the store was empty. He put on a smile and replied, "Yes, Sarah." I decided to keep it casual. I was thinking about people from a long time ago. He raised his eyebrow. Oh, were there any regulars from, say, 20 years ago? That stood out. Anyone named Michael? Mr. Henderson paused, stroking his chin. Michael. It's a common name, Sarah. There were a few, I'm sure. Why do you ask? I had to think of an answer fast. Just curious, I said, trying to sound casual. I was reading an old book, and the main character was named Michael. It made me think. Mr. Henderson smiled. Ah, said. He didn't seem to suspect anything, but he also didn't offer any helpful information. I knew I was on my own, and I knew I wasn't going to give up easily. Emily's words had touched my heart. I owed it to her, and maybe to Michael, to try. I knew that I would read every letter. Over the next few days, I read the remaining letters. Each one was a window into Emily's heart. She wrote about her new life, her attempts to move on, but always her thoughts returned to Michael. The letters were filled with a bittersweet mixture of happy memories and the sadness of what might have been. The final letter was the most poignant. It was dated almost a year after the first. Emily wrote about how she still thought of Michael every day. She still loved him, even though she knew it was probably hopeless. She said she often wondered if he ever thought of her. Then she mentioned a specific place, Greenwood Park. She wrote, "I remember our last day together, sitting by the old oak tree in Greenwood Park. We promised we'd always remember each other, no matter what. That was it. A clue. A real, tangible place. My heart pounded. Greenwood Park. I knew that park. It was on the other side of town, a large, sprawling park with walking paths, a small lake, and yes, many old oak trees. The decision was made. I couldn't ignore this. I couldn't just put the letters back in the box and pretend I'd never seen them. Emily's words, her enduring love, had reached across the years and touched me. I had to try to find Michael. I had to, at least, see if I could get closer to the answer, this ending of the unknown. I knew it was a long shot. 20 years is a long time. Michael could have moved away. He could have... Well, anything could have happened, but I had to try. The next Saturday, I went to Greenwood Park. I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. I packed a small bag with a bottle of water and a book, just in case. I told myself I was just going for a walk, enjoying the sunshine, but I knew I was on a mission. The park was busy. Families were having picnics, children were playing, and couples were strolling hand in hand. I walked slowly, scanning the faces, looking for someone who might fit the image I had in my mind of Michael, an older man, perhaps, with kind eyes, like Mr. Henderson, someone who looked like he might have a story to tell. I found the area with the oak trees. They were massive, their branches spreading wide, providing shade. I walked from tree to tree, reading the small plaques that identified some of them. Many were over 100 years old. I sat down on a bench under one of the largest oaks, feeling a little foolish. What was I expecting? That Michael would just be sitting here, waiting for me. I took out my book, but I couldn't concentrate. I kept looking around, my heart jumping every time I saw an older man walking by. After about an hour, I started to lose hope. Maybe this was a crazy idea. Maybe I should just go home. Then I saw him. He was sitting on a bench across the path, near the lake. He was older, with greying hair, and he was reading a book. He had a kind face, with lines that suggested a life well lived. He looked thoughtful and a little sad. Could it be him? My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. My hands were shaking. I took a deep breath and stood up. It was now or never. I had to talk to him, even if it wasn't him I had to try. I walked towards him, my steps slow and hesitant. The closer I got, the more nervous I became. What would I say? How would I explain? He looked up as I approached. His eyes were a soft blue, and they held a hint of something. Recognition. Curiosity. I couldn't tell. I stopped in front of him, my mouth suddenly dry. "Excuse me," I said, my voice trembling slightly. I'm sorry to bother you." He smiled politely. "That's all right," he said. His voice was gentle, with a slight warmth. I took another deep breath. I was wondering, is your name Michael? The words were out. There was no turning back now. The moment of truth had arrived. My fate, and possibly his, hung in the balance. The culmination of this unexpected journey rested on his answer. I braced myself, every nerve ending tingling with anticipation and a touch of fear. What a wild ride this has been. He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Then a slow, hesitant smile touched his lips. "Yes," he said. "My name is Michael." My breath caught in my throat. It was him. After all this time, after all the wondering, I had actually found him. I work at the Book Nook, I began, my voice still a little shaky. "I found something that I think belongs to you, or at least it's about you." He frowned slightly, a look of confusion on his face. "I'm not sure I understand. A few weeks ago, I was cleaning out the storage room," I explained. "I found a box of old letters. They were all addressed to you, from a woman named Emily." The colour drained from his face. He stared at me, speechless. The book he was holding slipped from his grasp and fell to the ground with a soft thud. "Emily," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Letters. I don't understand." I took a step closer. "They were never sent," I said gently. "They were in a box, tucked away in the back of the store. I don't know how long they'd been there." Shook his head as if trying to clear his thoughts. "Emily, she wrote to me. Many times," I said. "She wrote about your time together, about how much she loved you." I paused, choosing my words carefully. She had to make a difficult decision to move away with her family. He closed his eyes for a moment, his face etched with pain. When he opened them again, they were filled with a deep sadness. "I never knew," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I always wondered what happened to her. We were supposed to meet here in this park, but she never came. I waited and waited. I thought she had changed her mind." My heart ached for him, for both of them, for the years of misunderstanding, of lost connection. I wanted to tell him to go, get the letters, to read everything, but I held back. "The letters are at the bookstore," I say, "in the back." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for finding me, for telling me this," he continued. "Emily, she was the love of my life. I never forgot her. I always hoped. I always wondered." His voice trailed off. "I'm glad I could help," I said softly, even in a small way. He smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. It's not a small thing, he said. It's everything. We talked for a few more minutes. He told me a little more about Emily, about their time together. It was a bittersweet conversation, filled with both joy and regret. Finally, he stood up. I should go, he said. Yes, I said. He held out his hand and I shook it. His grip was firm and warm. Thank you again, Sarah, he said. You've given me a gift, a very precious gift. Then he turned and walked away, heading toward the park exit. I watched him go, feeling a sense of peace and fulfillment. I had done it. I had followed my intuition, taken a chance, and it had made a difference. I had connected two people who had been separated by time and circumstance. I had brought a little bit of closure to a story that had been left unfinished for far too long. The letters remained unsent, tucked away in their box, but their message, the essence of Emily's love, had finally been delivered, and that, I realised, was all that mattered. I smiled. Sometimes the smallest acts of courage, the simplest gestures of kindness can have the biggest impact, and sometimes the things we never send can speak volumes. The journey had been worth it. The questions were answered, the circle closed, and in a quiet corner of my heart, I knew I would always remember Emily and Michael, and the letters I never sent, but whose story I helped to complete.